Hey guys, and welcome back to our video lecture series. By now I'm sure I'm YouTube famous and gone viral, so, like and subscribe, give me those numbers so I can start making some money off these or something. So thanks for that. Anyways, today is our rapid fire review day. Oh, just like when we were in real school. Sad. But this is to review everything we've learned via these videos over the past 2 weeks so that you're ready for your quiz on Friday. So there will be no notes for today, but there will be questions. So just use this video as well as the notes from all the past days to answer those questions, or challenge yourself, don't use any notes at all. So let's start with the basics. Taxonomy, our classification of organisms. Our modern system was invented by good old Carl Linnaeus, our Swedish botanist friend. He invented our system of binomial nomenclature and our modern classification system as we know it. So binomial nomenclature, we've got genus and species. Genus is always capitalized, species is never capitalized, they're always in italics, like Felis catus, who's over there sleeping. We've got our taxonomic levels: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. We have 3 domains that we learned and 6 kingdoms that we have learned. Actually, we haven't talked about one of them yet, but we'll get there. So our 3 domains, remember we all came from one last universal common ancestor, good old Uncle Luca. So this will be Luca right here in the middle, gave rise to our 3 domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Bacteria and archaea are our prokaryotic domains, so all the organisms within these 2 domains are prokaryotes, while eukarya is our sole eukaryotic domain, so all of us, we are eukaryotes. So let's start with bacteria. So bacteria is a super diverse domain. They are everywhere, all around us, inside of us. They're difficult to characterize because they're so diverse. But they are prokaryotic always, so that means they're always unicellular. They can't have multicellular bodies like we do. They have no nucleus, and they have no specialized organelles like mitochondria or chloroplasts. Bacteria are often parasitic, so they can be parasites. They can be autotrophs like cyanobacteria, which photosynthesizes. They can be heterotrophs or autotrophs, and yeah, pretty diverse stuff. So we're not going to really dive into the specifics of the bacteria domain. Bacteria has 1 kingdom, which is eubacteria, which means true bacteria. So domain bacteria, kingdom eubacteria is what all of our bacteria are under. Our second domain, archaea, is our oldest domain, so it has the first organisms that roamed the earth, were a part of the archaea domain. They're also prokaryotic, so they're unicellular, have no nucleus, and have no specialized organelles, just like our bacteria friends. And archaea are not as common as bacteria because a lot of them are extremophiles, which means that they love extreme environments. So we've got our thermophiles that love high temperature, and our halophiles, which love high salt content. Archaea have kind of specialized cell walls that we don't see in bacteria or in eukaryotes, like protists or plants. And they have 1 kingdom, which is the Archaebacteria, which means old bacteria. So domain archaea, kingdom Archaebacteria. Now let's move on to the interesting stuff. Domain eukarya. So this is another really diverse domain. Most of the species that we think about and care about, like plants and animals and that kind of thing, are going to be found in domain eukarya. They are our eukaryotic domain, which means that they can be unicellular or multicellular. They have membrane-bound nucleus. They have a membrane-bound nucleus, and they also have specialized organelles, like we have mitochondria and plants have chloroplasts. Eukaryotes, because they can be multicellular, we now start to have specialized tissues. So you'll have a bunch of cells clumped in one part of the body that become a specialized area known as tissue, which then can become an organ. So we've got muscles and our circulatory system and like our stomach and different organs that are all made up of tissues that are specialized cells. And that's possible because we are eukaryotic and not prokaryotic, so we are multicellular. So our individual cells can actually have a different purpose than other cells. We have 4 kingdoms in the eukarya domain. We've got kingdom Protista, kingdom Fungi, kingdom Plantae, and kingdom Animalia. We have not talked about kingdom Animalia yet. We're not there. But we will be sometime soon. Not sure when, but we'll find out. So Kingdom Protista was the first eukaryotic kingdom that we talked about. Our protists are kind of our weird catch-all group for anything eukaryotic that doesn't fit into the fungi, plant, or animal categories. So our protists are kind of just everything that are left over, which means that they are very diverse and there's not like a set of rules for them. So they can be unicellular or multicellular. They can be heterotrophic, which means they eat stuff to get energy, or autotrophic, which means they make their own. They can be mobile or immobile, so move or don't move. And yeah, they can reproduce in multiple ways. But what they do have in common is that they're typically found in moist aquatic environments. And they've evolved some crazy unique ways to get their nutrients and move around. We separate these into 3 groups based off of how they get their energy. We've got our animal-like protists, which are protozoans, which are heterotrophs. We've got our plant-like protists, like algae, that are autotrophs, which means they photosynthesize. And our fungus-like protists, which are decomposers. So they're also heterotrophs, but they're specifically decomposers. So these are like fungi, obviously. So those are our protists. Let's move on to kingdom fungi. So our fungi kingdom is made up of over 100,000 characterized species. They are all multicellular except our one exception. Do you remember what it is? Maybe? It's yeast, correct, on a roll. They've got cell walls made of chitin. They can reproduce sexually or asexually, and they are all heterotrophs, which means that they eat to get energy. They absorb their energy. So our fungi have specialized structures called hyphae, which are kind of like little tentacles. They're long root-like tubes, and they grow into whatever our fungus is getting its energy from. So hyphae are used for getting energy, like eating. They're also used for reproduction, and they are also used for mutualistic relationships. So we've got 3 types of fungi based off of how they get their energy. So we've got our decomposers, which are heterotrophs, but they are classified as saprotrophs, which means that they secrete enzymes out into what they're trying to eat that break down that material. So they break down the complex molecules like lignin, which wood is made out of, which we talked about. And then they can absorb the nutrients and energy that are a result of the broken down molecules. So our decomposers are our first type. Then we've got mutualists, which have mutualistic relationships with plants. They're hostoria, dig into plant roots and they give them phosphates and good nutrients and stuff. And then they use their hyphae, which are the specialized structure of fungi, to get sugars from the plant roots. in return. So we call this mutualistic relationship mycorrhizae. We call these mycorrhizal fungi. And then our third type are predators and parasites. So they also use their hyphae, but they actually use them to capture prey or to latch onto a host and take energy from that host. So they've all got hyphae, which are the most important structure of a fungus. The hyphae, when they've got a big clump of it, when it's like a big mass of hyphae and it's all tangled up, and it's usually like a white, like soft looking material, that is the fungus's mycelium, which is like what you see when you rip up a mushroom and there's white fuzzy stuff under the soil. That's the mycelium, and it's made up of all the individual hyphae. So that is kingdom fungi. How are we doing on time? Pretty good. So moving right along to kingdom plantae, my personal favorite, much more interesting than these other ones. So our kingdom plantae, they are all multicellular. They are all eukaryotic, obviously, because they're in the domain eukarya. They have cell walls made of cellulose. So fungi have chitin cell walls. Plants always have cellulose cell walls. Plants are non-motile, which means they can't move on their own, and they always reproduce sexually. All plants are autotrophs, which means they perform photosynthesis and get their energy from the sun. So they do this using the chlorophyll pigment that is in their plastids of their chloroplasts, which are their specialized organelles inside of plant cells that are able to photosynthesize and capture the sun's energy. So we classify plants into 5 groups that we have talked about. We base these on body structure, if they have a vascular system, and also how they reproduce. Our first group is the phallophytes. We don't care about those. They don't have like a well-defined body structure. They're not interesting. We're kind of skipping over them. And then second, we've got the bryophytes, which are a little bit more interesting. This is our moss and liverworts and hornworts. They're very small and they are non-vascular plants, so they do not have a vascular system. Then we've got our pteridophytes, which are our ferns, our horsetails. They have well-defined structures like roots, stems, and leaves, and they have a vascular system, but they do not use seeds. So ferns and other pteridophytes don't use seeds. And then we've got our gymnosperms, which are vascular plants with seeds that use exposed seeds. They typically have cones or something similar in which the seed is exposed on the outside of, and the pollen comes and fertilizes that, fertilizes the egg and results in a seed on the outside of this cone. We talked about that on Monday already. And then we've got our angiosperms, which are vascular plants that use fruits and flowers for reproducing. So our pteridophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperms are all our vascular plants. The ferns do not use seeds. Gymnosperms and angiosperms do, but angiosperms have fruits and flowers. So that's the difference between our main 3 groups of plants. And then we've got the bryophytes, which are not vascular at all. So our non-vascular plants, our bryophytes, these were our first plants to evolve. They don't have that specialized conductive tissue that is the vascular system, so they can't move water and nutrients around their body. So this limits their growth and also results in them needing water for reproduction, and they have to grow like really close to water or really moist soil because they'll need that water because they're not able to hold it in their bodies very well. So like all plants, non-vascular plants, reproductive cycle has an alternation of generations, which means over their lifespan, they have 2 separate forms. They've got their gametophyte form and their sporophyte form. Non-vascular plants, bryophytes, are gametophyte dominant. On Monday, we talked about vascular plants, which are sporophyte dominant. Our bryophytes are gametophyte dominant. So the moss itself is the gametophyte. So you've got a male moss stalk basically, and then the female moss. At the top of the male moss, you've got the antheridia, which produces the sperm. On the top of the female, you've got the archegonia, which produces the egg. Once water is introduced, the sperm gets washed onto the egg, fertilization occurs, and then we have a diploid zygote, which grows into the sporophyte, which in this case is just a little tiny stalk with a capsule of spores at the top. So the sporophyte in this case is smaller than the gametophyte, and so it's a much smaller part of the plant, and it's not like the main part. So the sporophyte produces spores through meiosis, releases those. These spores are haploid, and once they hit moist ground, they will grow into another gametophyte. So those are our non-vascular plants. Our vascular plants have conductive tissue, so they can move food and water around from one part of their body to another. This was a big evolutionary breakthrough because now they can get bigger, they can store their food, and they can store their water. So we've got 3 main tissue types of our vascular plants that we talked about. They've got dermal tissue, which is the outermost layer. They've got vascular tissue, which is the conductive stuff that moves water and nutrients around their body. And they've got ground tissue, which is everything else. So those are the 3 basic tissue types. If they grow those 3 basic tissue types, that's called primary growth, and they stop growing, those are herbaceous plants. If they go through the primary growth, so they've got dermal tissue, vascular tissue, and ground tissue, and they keep growing woody tissue, which is called secondary growth, those are woody plants. So that's like trees, shrubs, and vines. So the parts of the plant include the roots at the bottom, which absorb the water and nutrients, they store food, and they keep the plant anchored in the ground, they prevent erosion. And then you've got the stem, which transports fluids, it stores nutrients, and it supports the leaf. In the leaf, this is where gas exchange with the atmosphere happens, this is where they take in sunlight for photosynthesis, and this is where they perform photosynthesis to make food. We've got a lot of different types of plant cells or tissue that we talked about. So xylem and phloem are both part of the vascular tissue. So the xylem carries water from the roots to the leaves, and the phloem carries sugar around the plant body. So the xylem and the phloem are the 2 types of vascular tissues. So in the stem, we've got 2 types of cells we talked about. We've got parenchyma cells and sclerenchyma cells. So they basically are thick, long cells that hold up the plant body. Parenchyma cells are found in herbaceous plants, and sclerenchyma cells, which are even thicker and stronger and made of lignin, are found in woody plants. So these are the ones that are have really thick, strong cell walls, and then they die and they leave that cell wall behind, and then this happens and happens and happens, and eventually we get these layers of dead cell walls, which are just made of lignin, and that is tree bark. Did I miss anything? In the leaf, you've got chloroplasts, which we already talked about. They have the plastids, which have the pigment chlorophyll, which is a photosynthetic pigment, and that is what allows plants to perform photosynthesis and get their energy. Leaves also have stomata on the underside, which are those little openings with like 2 lima beans on the side of them, that let out water and take in gases, which is called evapotranspiration, which we also talked about. Vascular plant reproduction, they are all sporophyte dominant. Ferns have no seeds, and they produce spores on the underside of their fronds in sori, which are clusters of spore capsules. They release those spores, and those hit the moist ground, produce a tiny gametophyte, which is like that weird looking structure that we talked about on Monday, that produces both the male and the female reproductive parts. Fertilization occurs, results in an embryo that grows into the sporophyte, which is the fern itself. Gymnosperms, these are like pine trees. The tree produces male cones and female cones. Through meiosis, the male cone produces pollen, the female cone produces the egg, the pollen fertilizes the egg, and you get a seed. And then the seed grows into the tree again. And then angiosperms, we've got the flowering plant, so it could be a flower or a tree or whatever else, another flowering plant. So instead of cones, they produce a flower. And the flower has both male and female parts in the same flower, but they typically don't pollinate themselves. They rely on pollinators to come in and do that for them and pollinate different plants so that they can get some genetic diversity. So the flower has both male and female parts. The male parts, which are called the stamen, are made up of the anther and the filament, so that produces pollen through meiosis. The female part is made up of the stigma, style, and ovary, which produces the through meiosis the female ovule. Then once pollination occurs, the pollen enters the ovule and fertilization happens, which results in a seed. So the ovule will swell and the wall will toughen around the seed, around the embryo to produce the seed, and then the ovary, which is around the ovule, grows into the fruit. And then that fruit gets eaten by something or falls on the ground and rots and goes underground or gets pooped out somewhere. And then that grows into our sporophyte, which is the tree or the flower or whatever the whole plant is. So that is about it for our rapid fire review. Make sure to answer the review questions on Schoology. That'll be a great review before the quiz on Friday. If you have any questions, let me know. This is our last video before spring break, so you won't see this lovely face until a week and a half from now. So really cherish this time. I hope you guys are hanging in there, doing well at home in your quarantine state, and let me know if you need anything. I love you guys. See ya.